Welcome to The Explainer, where today we're going to dig into one of the most wild and honestly forgotten events in American history. It's a story where defending democracy, well, it meant more than just casting a ballot. It meant picking up a gun.
And look, I want to be crystal clear here. This isn't some line from a Hollywood script. This was real life in a small town in Tennessee. Think about that. Guys who just got back from fighting dictatorships all over the globe, they come home to find they have to do it all over again in their own backyard, with guns and dynamite. It's incredible.
So, this is what it looked like the morning after. An overturned car, a street in chaos. This was the scene at dawn. But, to really get how we ended up here, you gotta understand that this whole thing didn't just explode out of nowhere. The fuse had been burning for a long, long time.
And that right there, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How does this even happen in America? To figure that out, we've got to go back a bit. We need to look at the decade of straight-up corruption that lit the fuse and set the stage for all this chaos.
All right, so for a solid 10 years, McMinn County wasn't really run by a government in the way you and I think of it. It was controlled by this corrupt political machine. And for them, the law wasn't about justice. Nope, it was a tool to make money and stay in power. A takeover like this doesn't just happen overnight. It started back in '36 and just got worse and worse. By the early '40s, grabbing ballot boxes and counting them in secret was just how things were done. And here's the really galling part. While thousands of local guys were overseas, literally fighting and dying for freedom, their own freedom was being stripped away right here at home. And when they begged for help from the federal government, crickets. Nothing.
So you might be asking, how does a machine like this keep the lights on? Well, it was fueled by this completely predatory system. Deputies literally got paid a fee for every single person they arrested. This created this perverse incentive for them to just arrest people, often on totally bogus charges. See, policing wasn't about keeping people safe. It was a business, a straight-up for-profit racket.
And what this all boils down to is that the most basic right you have in a democracy, your vote, was turned into a complete joke. I mean, sure, you could go and cast your ballot, but the machine? They were the ones who decided who really won, all behind the locked doors of the local jail.
But then, the war ended, and the guys who had stared down fascism and authoritarianism overseas, they started coming home. And they came home to find a little dictatorship running their own town.
And we're not talking about a small number here. 3,000. That's how many veterans came back to McMinn County. That was almost 10% of the entire population. And these guys, they were trained, they were disciplined, and they knew what fighting for democracy actually looked like.
This quote from one of the GI leaders just says it all, doesn't it? We just got plain tired of being pushed around by a bunch of thugs. Can you imagine? You survive the war, you face down the Axis powers, only to come home and get shaken down by the local sheriff for your military pay. It's unbelievable.
So they had a choice to make, and they decided to fight back. But, and this is key, their first move wasn't with guns. Nope. They tried to use the system. They got organized, put together their own slate of candidates, and ran on a simple, powerful promise in a town that hadn't seen a fair election in a decade.
So Election Day arrives August 1st, 1946. And how does the political machine respond to this legitimate democratic challenge? Well, not with speeches or debates. They responded with overwhelming, brutal force.
The day kicks off with pure, raw intimidation. The sheriff, he basically imports his own private army. We're talking 200 to 300 armed deputies, a lot of them not even from the area. And let's be real, they weren't there to guard the polls. They were there to control them.
So the vets, they're still trying to do this by the book. They send in their own official poll watchers, to make sure the count is fair. The machine's response? Beat them up and throw them in jail. Just like that. Every legal door was being slammed shut in their faces.
And then, things took a much darker turn. A deputy shot an elderly black farmer, a man named Tom Gillespie, in the back. In for what? For trying to vote. That's it. That was the moment everyone realized this machine would literally shoot people to stay in power.
That was it. That was the point of no return. Right on cue, as the polls were closing, the deputies did exactly what everyone knew they would. They grabbed the ballot boxes, barricaded themselves inside the jail, and got ready to fix the results. For the veterans, it was crystal clear. Every single peaceful, legal option was gone.
So, with every peaceful path completely blocked, the veterans made a decision. They figured the only way to deal with illegal force was with force of their own.
What happens next is just incredible. It's basically a coordinated military-style siege. First, they arm themselves by raiding the local armory. By 9 p.m., they have the jail completely surrounded. They demand the ballot boxes. The machine refuses. And bam, a 6-hour gunfight kicks off in the middle of town. When that's not enough, they start using dynamite. They actually collapse the jail's front porch. And just like that, 20 minutes later, white flags come out. The deputies surrender.
So, by the time the sun came up, the votes were finally being counted the right way, out in the open, under the watchful eyes of the veterans. And the result? It wasn't even close. The GI ticket won by a 2-to-1 margin. It was a landslide, proving what everyone knew. The machine had been stealing elections for a decade.
So the battle was over. The corrupt machine was smashed. But, as it turns out, winning the war for real, lasting change, that's a whole lot harder than a single night of fighting.
Look, the short-term win was undeniable. They broke the machine and the Jaycees took office. But the long-term reality? It was a lot messier. Turns out it's one thing to overthrow a corrupt government. It's another thing entirely to build a stable one to replace it. Within a year, the whole Jaycee government had pretty much collapsed from infighting.
And maybe this is the most fascinating part of the whole story. In the aftermath, the very same veterans who led this rebellion, they were conflicted. They actually warned other towns not to do what they did, saying you shouldn't try to solve election disputes with a gun. It shows just how desperate they must have been and how much they wrestled with the path they were forced to take.
So the Battle of Athens doesn't really give us any simple answers, does it? It's messy, it's complicated, and it's a deeply American story that we don't talk about enough. But it leaves us with one of the most powerful, and maybe unsettling, questions a free society can ever face. When the system that's supposed to protect your rights is the very thing taking them away, what are you supposed to do?